kind of a short presentation that will, I think, answer many of your questions. So as we go through, bear with me, we'll get as many answers as we can. When I get done with the presentation, we'll go to the chat room and we'll take a look at whatever questions you do have. But again, that is our primary purpose today. A little bit of housekeeping. I specifically want to thank Hawai'i P-20, Gus and Leslie and Angela for providing the food today. I hope you all enjoyed your continental breakfast. We will have lunch once we have finished, and that's being provided by Hawai'i P-20. The restrooms, if you haven't found them, are down the hall, nearest palm tree. You pick it. It's all up to you. Now, jumping right into it, let me kind of make it easy to start if you have to check out early and go away. And let me give you the answers right off the top. And being that it's financial aid and being that I've been around a while, I know most of the answers. And there are there are 3 standard financial aid answers. And I have now added a 4th answer to my repertoire because of the whole COVID thing. The first, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, the first answer to financial aid questions is, it depends. It's never a straightforward, easy thing. We've got to ask you 5 more questions before I can answer your question. So that's the first one, is it depends. The second answer that always comes up in financial aid is maybe. And we tend to use that a lot just because it's different situations, it's never the same, and maybe, maybe not. So that's kind of answer number 2. The third answer that I want to really stress here this morning is that's institutional. A lot of the things I'm going to talk about, a lot of the things that you're dealing with are not universal. They're up to the institution. So while I can give you guidelines, I can give you general background, the answer is going to come from the financial aid office at the institution where the student is attending. Schools have different policies, they have different procedures, and I don't pretend to speak for all of the schools. I don't even speak for my school for that matter, but it is institutional, and much of what you need is going to have to come from the institutional. And then my 4th standard answer that has evolved really because of all this COVID stuff is quite simply, I don't know. And that's taken me a while to get used to because I know everything. For those of you who have known me for a while, I pride myself on having all the answers to everything. And nowadays, it's just not true. Things are changing so fast. I knew what it was yesterday, but I don't know what it's going to be tomorrow, and I don't necessarily know what it is today. So that's my 4th answer. So as we go through, you'll hear those frequently, I'm afraid. I just wanted to give you a heads up on that. Let me start in with the FAFSA. Good news for those of you who have been working with it, we didn't have any radical changes between 1920 and 2021. It's pretty much the exact same form. As you are dealing with students, if they have not yet filed 2021, please make it clear to them that it is not too late. I don't care what the dates are. Yeah, there's money that's gone because we're past most of the preferred dates, but there's still money out there, and there are other reasons, but we encourage every single student to file a FAFSA. No excuses, meaning your parents make $600,000 a year. I don't care, file it anyway. Have them get a FAFSA in. It's not a difficult document. It doesn't take days. It takes 30 to 60 minutes if they've got all the information to get it done. And we, again, just don't know what's coming in the future, but a lot of it may revolve around the FAFSA. We do not have a draft FAFSA yet for 21-22. I've been watching, I've been looking, it is not out yet. What did come out just recently, 2 days ago, I believe, is the draft technical reference. And this always comes out first. And this is for computer programming kind of people, for the geeks. It lets them adjust their systems with all of the computer tech stuff, which I have no idea whatsoever. It's a 50-page document. But one of the nice things is there's a column of what has changed from this year and last year. There were no significant change in the tech reference. Yes, we updated dates, we updated references and things, but no new fields, no new information coming on the FAFSA. So whatever you're hearing out of Congress, I know that there's several senators anyway that are talking about adding fields on the FAFSA to deal with COVID conditions and loss of employment and things like that. I do not believe that we're going to see that for 21-22. we're going to have the same FAFSA. Please remind your students to review their student aid report. We're really good about getting them to file and getting them to complete it and click the submit button and get it in, but they need to review the student aid report. And when I say review, what I'm most concerned with is that they read the title page, the cover page. That's where it's going to be pointed out if there are problems. So if the Social Security number is not matching, if the selective service didn't go through, if immigrations is not clearing, if they've been selected for verification, any of these type of problems will be spelled out in that cover letter. We really want the students to know that. I know part of what you're dealing with now is the frustration of students who are saying, I submitted my FAFSA 6 months ago, it got in, I got my confirmation code, everything was great, it went in, and I haven't heard anything yet. And as we look into it, what we're finding out is the student was selected for verification and has not submitted their verification form, or their Social Security didn't go through and they haven't dealt with, there are little things that could have been dealt with had they reviewed that student aid report that has delayed the entire thing for them. So encourage them to review the student aid report. And if you have the opportunity, have them send you the cover sheet and read it and see if there's any problems they need to deal with or need to take a look at. Let me go to packaging and awarding, kind of give you a current state on that. And I'm going to throw in one of my key answers, institutional. Realize that packaging and awarding is strictly by institution. I can just kind of give you an overview and some ideas of what's happening out there, but this is up to the school. So if a student's missing an award, don't call me, don't email me. There's nothing I can do about it, unless it's West Oahu, and then I can help. But otherwise, this is a question that's got to be directed to the financial aid office at the school where the student is attending. And I can tell you system-wide, up until March, we were doing great. Schools were really on it. I mean, we were really proud of the financial aid offices. They were getting awards out in a really timely fashion. It was a good year. And then, of course, March hit, and then you threw that out the window, and things just kind of got miserable after that. So, I mean, they're still awarding, they're still packaging. But for many of the students who submitted their FAFSAs after March, that came in April and May, there's a wait. And I'm afraid there's going to be a wait. I don't have a timeline to give you. I can tell you on my campus, we are now reviewing our April submissions. So we're pretty good up through the March 31st time period, but we're kind of, no, we're beyond April. We're moving into May at this point. So we're working it. We're working it very hard. And I know every other institution is, excuse me, but there are delays in this process. One of the big things that we're finding is the whole verification process. Students are waiting and waiting and waiting, but they've been selected for verification. They're not going to get packaged. They're not going to receive their award until they complete the verification thing. Now, for those of you who know me, I'm relatively new to the UH system, so I'm learning a lot of things. And one of the things I have learned is this portal for students called MyUH. And I'm telling every student I talk to, have you checked your MyUH? I don't know why, but have you checked your MyUH? You got to check your MyUH. That is where they're going. You get into the MyUH, you go to the financial aid, and you go look for the list of documents, because in there is spelled out exactly what the student is missing. So, there will be possibly a 2021 dependent verification worksheet not filed or not received. So they need to follow up on that. And you may need to help them find the MyUH. This is one of the things that we're finding, is that a lot of our incoming students don't necessarily know how to get there, and they have problems getting there. So you may need to advise them on how to find the MyUH section for financial aid, but they need to be on top of that and looking for documentation. This is one of the biggest reasons why somebody hasn't gotten an award, is because there's documentation missing. Generally, not always, but generally it's been verification. This has been one of the things that's holding up a lot of packages, is the verification. The verification, as you're aware, it's a relatively simple form for most dependent students. I mean, they have to list how many people in their family, they got to get parents' signatures and who's in the household and what their age is and where they're going to school and things like that. They want to make sure when you complete a verification form that it's consistent with what's on the FAFSA. One of the things we're finding on verification forms is household size. So on the FAFSA, when the student is filling it out, they've got themselves, and if their parents are married, there's 2 parents. We know that. There's another question that says, you got any brothers and sisters in your household? And then another question that comes up, anybody else living in your household? So there's a number that's calculated on the FAFSA of how many people are living in the household. When they do a verification form, we want to know who they are. So the student starts by listing their name. It says self already on the form, their age, and where they're going to be attending school. Then they list mom and dad, age, and then anybody else in the household. So if the FAFSA had 5 people in the household on it, that number better agree with the verification form, or we're going to be starting all over again, and we would delay it again, because either the verification form is wrong and needs to be resubmitted, or the FAFSA is wrong and needs to be corrected. So we want to make sure the information they're providing is consistent with what was filed on their FAFSA and is on their student aid report. The other area where we're having problems is the non-tax filer form for the students. So the data retrieval has been working really well. Most of our students have got the data retrieval done for their parents. It's when we get to the student, and the student is a non-tax filer, they're selected for verification, and the forms all say, you must submit a non-tax filer form from the IRS, which, if you haven't seen one, is basically a letter from the IRS that says, we don't have any taxes for you. That's what the form wants. That's what the procedure wants. Anybody tried getting a hold of IRS recently and requesting one of these? Rhetorical question, you don't need to answer, but it's basically become impossible to get one of these for the students. They can't do it by phone anymore. They're not mailing the form anymore. The only way to get it is actually create an online account. And if you've seen that, that's not an easy thing to do. I gave up on it personally. It was so complicated. I mean, you have to provide a mortgage statement, you have to provide credit card information. It doesn't cost anything, but it's part of the identity, safety, and verifying who you are to put all this in. And for many of our students, it just doesn't happen. And that's okay. If they've attempted, for that matter, even if they say they've attempted and were unable to get the information from the IRS, the student is now permitted to submit a signed document that basically says, I didn't work, I didn't file taxes, I didn't make any money, and I'm not required to file taxes, I didn't make any money. Sign it and submit that to the financial aid office. Now, before you go out and tell your students to do that, if the student is having difficulty or has got problems getting a non-tax filer form, I recommend first you check with the financial aid office at their school. I think that's the advice you will get from the school, but it's better to come from them than to come from me. Understand, you cannot submit a document or have a student submit a document and say, because Frank said so. That's not going to help you very much. It's got to come from their financial aid office. CARES Act. I hate it, I hate it, I hate it, go away. I don't want it part of my life anymore. It's been absolutely miserable, and I'm not involved in it all that much. But it is taking up a tremendous amount of time from some very key financial aid people. And it is one of the reasons why awarding follow-up with students is being delayed and taking longer than normal, because they're spending their time with this CARES Act. I'm not going to go into great details, but the short story is schools all got a pool of money that was designed to give out to students as emergency grants, basically. So if their education was disrupted and they incurred up to a certain amount of expenses relating to COVID, then they were eligible for this grant. So that was the simple part of it. And this changes every single day. I got to tell you, I read the department's notifications, and it's just going crazy. The courts are involved, Congress is involved, and it's like, our heads are spinning. When it came out initially, and for the last, or at least last week, they were sticking to this. The guideline that we got from the department, or that institutions got from the Department of Education, was in order to receive this money, the student needed to be Title IV eligible. Okay, so a couple things with that. One, DACA students are out. International students are out. Students who are just taking a class and are not in a degree program or a certificate program are out. I think I mentioned international students were out. So they were automatically excluded from this calculation as well. Students who were enrolled in a purely online program, and by this I mean enrolled in purely an online program prior to March 13th. So they started off in online, not the ones we moved to online, but everybody before them, they were excluded as well. Then got to be the question, Title IV eligibility. Title IV eligibility is basically the FAFSA. That's what I'm dealing with. So, you know, eligibility is citizenship status, selective service, all those different questions that are asked on the FAFSA is what determines Title IV eligibility. Then it was left to the schools. And again, I will throw out the word institutional. Schools decided how they wanted to handle it, what was the best way for them. It was done differently at schools throughout the country. I mean, I've heard of a dozen different procedures that were in place. It was done differently here in the state of Hawaii. So I don't have the answer as to how it was done, but I do know that Title IV eligibility stayed there. There have now been 2 court cases, one filed in the state of Washington and one filed by the community colleges in California, where the judge has ruled that that was no good and has thrown it out, has ruled against the department. I don't know what schools are going to be doing about that, but at the moment it applies only to the state of Washington and only to the state of California. So stay tuned because we're going to get other changes. But we basically went into this dispersing the funds to students who were Title IV eligible. How do I determine if a student's Title IV eligible? Well, the easiest way is if the student had filed the FAFSA, they're Title IV eligible. Successfully filed the FAFSA, they're Title IV eligible. So that was kind of like the path of least resistance, and many schools use that. So they looked at their student body and they said, anybody who's filed the FAFSA, you're eligible, you get money. Some schools, I don't know of anybody necessarily in Hawaii, but I do know of schools on the mainland that said, well, you don't have to file a FAFSA. We'll come up with a form, and they listed all the eligibility requirements for financial aid and said, if you can certify that you meet all these, sign here at the bottom, and we'll consider you eligible. So that was another alternative. Then there was the issue, do we automatically just give the money to the student, or do we make them do an application? Personally, not representative of any institution whatsoever, I think the smartest thing to have done would have been to have pulled your Title IV eligible students, meaning pulled everybody who had filed the FAFSA, met the criteria, divided up the money and given it to them, and you'd be done with this. Schools that decided to implement applications, well, when you send out a form for students and you send them an email, one of the things you find is a couple things actually. One, they don't read their emails, so they miss it entirely, or they don't complete the form, or they think it's a scam, so they're not going to, I mean, there's all kinds of issues why they're not paying attention to it and it ain't happening for them. And that's happened. So some schools now are faced with a balance. They still got money. They tried to give it all away. They really did, but it got complicated to the point where they didn't give it all away. So they're looking at a balance, and they're thinking hard. How do I get rid of this money? And by saying get rid of this money, it's how do I put it in students' hands where it belongs? That's what we're after, is to get it to students. Well, our spring students are gone. We are still eligible to go back to our spring students and award. Again, institutional. Schools will make that decision. We have summer students. Yes, there are fall students coming, but at the moment they're not students, so they're not eligible. Do we hang on to this money until the fall? I don't think so. I don't think people want to be dealing with this throughout the entire summer and into the fall. So I think you're going to see a concerted effort on the parts of schools to disperse this funds now. And again, I will stress, this is institutional, and there's going to be 10 schools out there that prove me wrong and do it some other way. But that's just kind of where we're at with the CARES funding. I want to talk a bit about special circumstances and professional judgment. And I will start right off by saying institutional. Schools have their own policies and their own procedures, and before a student does anything or submits anything, they need to talk to the financial aid office. The financial aid office will direct them and guide them into what forms need to be filed, what the procedure is. And things like, is it even worth the student's time to do it? A couple general guidelines, though, that we seem to be missing in the professional judgment side of this. And just for those of you who don't know, professional judgment is a term that's used to explain the authority given to financial aid offices by the Department of Education to make an adjustment to students' financial aid applications because of special circumstances. And, special circumstances, these are things like hurricane comes in, blows the roof off your house, you got to drop 40 grand to get a new roof. You can't put that on the FAFSA. And that's money you don't have to pay for education. That's the special circumstances. A dramatic increase in medical expenses because somebody got seriously sick. Reduction in income, obviously one of the more common ones we're seeing right now, but parents, students who have lost jobs, income's been reduced. These are what we consider special circumstances. I'm poor, I need more money because I can't afford this is not a special circumstance in anybody's book. That doesn't count. So before a student even starts thinking about doing a special circumstances request or appeal or whatever we want to call it, number one, they have to be admitted. So if they haven't done an admissions application and been accepted for admitted, they're not in the game. Two, they have to get an award letter, or they have to have an award letter. A professional judgment in special circumstances is basically appealing an award that was issued by the financial aid office. If you haven't received your award letter yet, what are you appealing? There's nothing to appeal. And of course, you can't get an award letter unless you've been accepted for admission. So it kind of ties in here together. Zero EFC. In many cases, not all, but in many cases, students with a zero EFC have got nothing to appeal. They may very well just be wasting their time. You've already got maximum aid. Now, let me just back that up by telling you kind of what we do with professional judgment or what it's all about. Professional judgment is not a case where I get a paper from the student, they need money, and I give them more money. That's not how it works. Our authority is that we are allowed to change data elements in the FAFSA and recalculate their EFC. So in the case of like a reduction in income, once I get it and understand that we are in audit mode, which means we're in constant cover o cole mode. We need documentation. I need letters. I need forms. I got paperwork I got to have before I'm going to move. But once we've got all that, what I'm allowed to do is to go back into the FAFSA and change their income to whatever the year is we're accepting. So, if we were accepting a 2019 tax form, I can go in and modify those numbers. The student can't, but I can. I submit the FAFSA, I recalculate the eligibility, I get a new AFC, and now I calculate the student's eligibility. It's not a matter, and the two big areas where I can do data adjustments are in income numbers, IRS type numbers, and in cost of attendance. So if there's been an increase in expenses because of the cost of attendance, I can adjust those numbers as well. But that's basically what we do with professional judgment. We don't just say, oh, you need more money, here, you get more money. We're recalculating their EFC based on a new set of data, and then we're rerunning the calculation. Keep in mind that this is happening well into now. This isn't happening back in March. This is happening in June and July and possibly even August, and for some students into the fall term, which means a lot of the funds that they would have been eligible for had we been able to do this back in February, which we couldn't, but they're gone. So institutional aid has probably already been dispersed. Campus-based funds like work study and FAFSA, these funds are probably gone. So even in recalculating a student's eligibility, they may not have access to all of the funds that were there 6 months ago. In a lot of cases, or in some cases, by recalculating or reusing new income numbers, we may lower the EFC enough where a student who was not Pell eligible may now be Pell eligible. But I don't know that until I actually reprocess the FAFSA, get a new FC, and then calculate their award. I just got to stress on this, institutional. Do not have a student do anything whatsoever until they've been in contact with the financial aid office at the school where they're going to be attending, because there will be different procedures and policies and forms out there that the student will need to file, and it's specific to the institution. I want to make sure that you're all aware of the email for FAFSA help, FAFSA@hawaii.edu. And I'm very happy to say towards the end of my presentation here that that is not institutional, which means two things. The students or parents or families or anybody can send us an email, and there are two people who man this virtually 24 hours a day because we work in financial aid and we don't have a life. But, well, we're looking at this every single day and trying to assist and answer students' questions, how to complete a FAFSA, whatever the questions. The other part with being not institutional is that we are not able to give students information about their awards. We will refer them to the financial aid office at the institution where they're going, but we don't have access to individual student awards or data or anything else like that because we are not an institution. And for the record, this is Hawai'i P-20 was responsible for bringing this up, and it's Gus and I that are in the background running this thing. So they're getting fairly decent advice. Okay, that really is everything I had to say. You know me, I can talk for hours and hours and hours, but the important thing today are your questions. So I would like to go to that. And Lindsay, or Gus, or somebody feed me.
Can we feed you?
Feed me, Seymour.
Hey Gus, do you mind looking in the chat box and start asking some of the questions?
we have some good questions coming up. When a student is not able to provide parent information because of a broken relationship with parents, can they qualify for any financial aid? I guess you're assuming that the student is trying to be recognized as an independent student.
Well, let me answer that two ways. One, if it's a case of parents getting divorced or parents being separated, it's a relatively easy process. The student will report information for one parent. Which parent is the parent with whom the student lived the most? So just to reiterate that, I don't care who claimed him on taxes. I don't care what divorce papers say. None of that is relevant. The only thing that is relevant is where did the student live most of the time? That's the parent they're going to provide the information for.
Frank, in this case, they're talking about a broken relationship with the parents, so the student is not able to provide parent information.
Oh, okay. I can answer that too. The process that's in place for that is very similar to professional judgment. It's called dependency override, where a student can ask the financial aid office at the institution they will be attending that they be declared independent. And it's a tricky process. Again, it must be documented, but basically it has to be a situation where it is unreasonable to expect parental contribution. And unreasonable is broken home, abuse, parents are gone, meaning we don't know where they are. They're totally disappeared. They're just not part of the student's life at all. And then the student is going to have to document that in two ways. One, they're going to have to write a note explaining the situation, but they're also going to need a third-party verification. And a third-party verification is not your sister, your auntie, your grandma, or anybody like that. It is a counselor, a social worker, an attorney, a police officer, somebody like that will have to verify that, yes, I know the student, I know the situation, and this is what's going on. And again, what we are after is a determination that it would be unreasonable to expect parental information. That's what we need in order to make the override and call the dependency override. In completing a FAFSA in a situation like that, it's a little tricky. They get to the question that says, after they filled in the demographic information, the FAFSA comes back and says, looks like you're a dependent student, you need to include parental information. The student has two choices. I will provide parental information or I will not. They click on the button that says I will not. And then they get these warning screens that come up and, you know, are you sure you're not going to give it? You're supposed to give it. Are you sure you're not going to give it? Why aren't you going to give it? And one of the options they have is that I have special circumstances. They will click that box. They will then be able to submit the FAFSA. It will not get processed. They will not get an EFC. They will get instructions that says contact the financial aid office. That's what they got to do.
Yeah. Elaine was asking about the non-filing tax transcript and the IRS. So what do we do if a student is asked for a non-filing tax transcript and the IRS is not mailing them out and student can't request it online?
Yeah, basically you contact the financial aid office and you ask them, and what they're going to tell you is that you need to submit a signed statement, or the student needs to submit a signed statement saying, I tried contacting IRS, I can't do it, I can't set up an online account, but I did not work, or I did not file taxes in 2018, I did not work in 2018, therefore I'm not required to file taxes, and sign it, and then submit that in lieu of the letter. Again, institutional, make sure you're checking with the financial aid office. I know at my school, at West Oahu, it's actually spelled out on our verification form. It says, if you can't get it, do this. So we're trying to make that as easy as possible, but it's a shortcut. It's pretty good. I mean, we like this. It's working.
Okay. Any other questions coming out in the chat?
So sorry, Gus, I'm not sure if you saw Cindy's first one. And again, I think this is institutional is the answer, but when a student is selected for verification, what is the average timeline for the colleges to get financial packages to students?
Hi, Cindy. The answer nowadays is forever. No, I'm joking. Sorry. It just feels that way. It's very frustrating for students because I know they're putting things in. They're getting the documents that are requested of them, and they're just sitting around waiting. And with everything that's going on, it's one frustration they really don't need. They're trying to put their life back together, and part of that is, or a big part of that is, you know, what's my financial aid? Can I afford to go to school? We're aware of that. All schools know that. We're working really hard. I can tell you part of that depends on when the information came in, but a good month anyway. I'm going to get shot for saying that because it doesn't sound good, but the reality is I think that's what we're dealing with.
Okay.
Thanks. And we have one from Elaine. What do we do if a student is asked for a non-filing tax transcript? And
we just covered that.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Elaine, you've asked the same question 3 times already.
Oh my gosh, sorry. My son must have.
Just kidding.
Thank you.
Okay, we have, could you speak to ways to help Marshallese families that fall in the crack of being immigrants, but not being citizens? Students often live with family members that are not parents. Guardianship is sometimes more loose rather than legal. Do you have any ideas, thoughts that we could help Marshallese families?
It's an excellent question, and I'll expand it just a little bit. Marshallese, Micronesians, and Palauans as well. They all kind of are in the same boat. FAFSA doesn't help them very much. And I understand the living situation, and I understand the family situation. However, I also understand that their parents don't make a lot of money. Having spent time in the islands, their income levels are low. You cannot use somebody who is not a legal guardian. So the informal or the Hanai situation where the student is living with auntie, uncle, grandma, grandpa, whatever, if it is not a court documented guardianship, you can't use that. And power of attorney does not count, and a family drawn up guardianship does not count. It has to be a court document, or you can't use the guardianship thing. I encourage our Marshallese and Micronesians and Palau students to get their parents' information. What happens here is a couple things. One, you can't use the data retrieval because we're not dealing with a U.S. tax return. The simplest way to deal with this is to go to a paper FAFSA and mail it back and forth and have them fill out a paper FAFSA. We accomplish a couple things. One, it lets the parents write down their information without having access to a computer, and allows then for paper signatures. Because the other issue you're faced with a FAFSA online is needing an FSA ID for the parents, in other words, to sign this. And many of them don't have Social Security numbers. And if you don't have a Social Security number, you can't get an FSA ID. You can file the FAFSA, but you cannot get an FSA ID. The other way is to do it online, or have the student do it all online, call mom and dad, get all the information you can. And then when you get to the end, have the student sign their FAFSA. And then when it goes to the parent side, select options for signing and print the signature page. There's a hard copy signature page that parents can sign, and they'll need to mail it, but get a hard copy signature and then mail that in. Slows the process down. It becomes a week to 2 weeks as opposed to a day to 2 days, but it can be done.
Hey Frank, could you talk a little bit about guardianship and those nuances in, my sister is watching me, my parents are in American Samoa, and I live with my sister, and she has legal guardianship of me. How does that impact FAFSA submission? And
when a student is in a legal guardianship, and I'll come back to the term in a moment, but when they are in a legal guardianship, when they get to the dependency questions, one of those questions is specifically, are you in a legal guardianship as determined by a court in your state of residence? If the student is able to check yes to that box, they are automatically an independent student and will not see the parental questions. They're not required to file parental information because they are independent. The same thing would hold true for a student in foster care or a student who was in foster care anytime after the age of 13. They're independent. They don't need foster parents' information. They just check off the box that says, yeah, I was in foster care, and move on. Same thing if a student is married. Same thing if a student has their own child for whom they're providing 50% of the support. These are independent students, and they're not required to provide parental information. I can promise you, though, that the financial aid office at almost every single institution is going to look at an 18 or 19-year-old kid who's just finished high school, who's being declared independent by virtue of one of those questions. We're going to look at that and ask for documentation. And in the case of guardianship, documentation is a court document. It's a document that has got a court seal and signature and everything on it that says, by virtue of the court of the state of Hawaii, this student is in a legal guardianship and Auntie May is the legal guardian. That's what we have to have. Again, power of attorney is not it. Real quick, one of the big scams that got uncovered recently, or it was about 6 months ago, and it was happening in a suburb in Chicago, but very wealthy parents were going over to their neighbors and saying, you know what? And this is when the student was a senior in high school. We're going to make you the guardians of our kid. And they would go to court. They would get an attorney if they weren't attorneys themselves, and they would draw up guardianship papers, and they would have it approved by the court, and they would make their neighbor their child's guardian. And guess what the neighbor would do? The neighbor would make their neighbor the child's. They were coming up with these phony guardianship papers in order to qualify their student as an independent student. Some of that just makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, especially if you're not the attorney, you're going to go out and spend $5,000, $6,000 to make your student independent and get them a $6,000 Pell Grant. Come on. I mean, but anyway, that was going on. They found that out recently.
Okay. Any other questions out there? Are there some frequently asked questions that you guys are experiencing with students? Asking about financial aid or scholarships. Oh, we got one. What does the student do if the parent guardians are not U.S. citizens and don't have a social security number?
They can still file the FAFSA. When they get to the Social Security, and I'm hemming and hawing because now I don't remember. I've just drawn a total blank because it's Friday and the bars are open. What can I tell you? There's a dummy number. Gus, do you know? Are we using 999 or?
Yeah.
999999999.
999999999.
Thank you. That's changed over the years. We used to use sixes, but somebody thought that was bad, and then we went to zeros, and now we're at 999. So they'll enter 9999999 as their Social Security number. It moves them past that section of it. They'll get to the signature section. Again, without a Social Security number, a real one, they're not allowed to have an FSA ID, so the student will need to print a paper parent signature page, sign it, and mail it in. Hey, and by the way, if a student's going to do that, make sure they submit the FAFSA. I just had a student last week we were going round and round because the Department of Ed said, we're not going to accept this paper signature. And the student was trying to explain to me why. And of course, students can't explain anything in any type of clarity. So I said, let me see the letter. And it was because she never submitted the FAFSA. She had gotten to that point, printed it out, had the parent sign it, mailed it in, still never submitted the FAFSA. So by the time the department got it, there was nothing to attach it to. It just didn't work. So we fixed that one easy enough. But make sure they're
okay.
Okay.
If a student entered foster care after the age of 13, but exited foster care before high school graduation, can they still enter yes as being considered independent?
Yes, yes, and yes. Yes, they can.
Okay, that's a good question. Okay. Any other questions coming through?
Sorry, did you see Cindy's one above, Gus?
Oh, sorry. Yes. What about students who have different wages for 2020 due to COVID? So getting back to professional judgment and.
Yeah, that's a special circumstance. And the circumstance is a reduction in income. So the short answer is institutional. Check with the school on what needs to be filed. I can tell you there's a variety of policies and procedures amongst the schools as to when we have reduction in income, or if we're going to look at a different year's income, what year we're going to accept. And there are different possibilities. And I'm not pretending to speak for any other institution. Depends on the school. But, we start with 2018 for 2021. That's the tax year we're using. Some schools will say, okay, we'll accept your 2019 income. So, and they'll do that because it's easily documentable, meaning more than likely the parents have filed their taxes for 2019, though nowadays with the extension up to July, not necessarily so. But in the past, at least the next year, we had a 12-month document with some very exact specific numbers on it. It gets a little tricky when we start looking at expected year income, meaning, okay, this is what I filed for 2019 because we were all working. And in March of 2020, we all lost our jobs. So our income for 2020 ain't going to come close to what it was in 2019. That's what we call that expected year income. And I mean, I've worked in a financial aid office where we would accept that. And I would sit down with the parents and the student and I would say, okay, today is June. We know how much you made in January, February, March, April, and May. Let's put that down. What do you think you're going to make for the next 6 months? So if you're getting unemployment benefits, how much is that? Are you working part-time? Just give it the best guess we can. And we would do a calculation and come up with an expected year mythical number for what we think income will be in 2020. And I would use that to calculate a student's eligibility. There are also schools out there that will not do that. They will take the last completed 12 months of income and they will base it on that. There's nothing in regulation that says I have to use a completed tax year, which means I could pick a 12-month period different than a calendar year. So I could say give me February or give me March through February or March 2019 through February of 20. I could use that 12-month period and document that income. Up to the school. The school will decide what income they will use in order to perform professional judgment.
Hey guys, Teresa just posted a great resource for homeless, unaccompanied homeless youth in there. Take a look at that. Any other questions?
Hey, Teresa, thanks for that. I didn't even know about that.
With the recent unemployment data breaches and stolen identities, do you foresee problems with filing the FAFSA in the coming years for these families? We're referring to the UH data breach?
Yeah, or any data breach. I don't foresee problems as far as the FAFSA. FAFSA is a very secure document, well, as secure as we can get. I guess nothing is secure, but they're pretty good at that. If a student or family has been subject to an identity theft outside of the financial aid realm, Social Security or whatever the case, but they're in the middle of an identity theft, yeah, it could cause problems. And it could cause problems right off the bat with the FSA ID. I've seen a few of these where Social Security is refusing to match because of an identity theft question. It can cause problems with the data retrieval for IRS. And I've seen that as well, where there's an identity theft case or file open in IRS. They will not match data retrieval at that point. Now, the student can still complete their FAFSA by manually entering the numbers, but we are recommending that they be talking to IRS and find out what this identity theft issue is if they're not aware for it. So yeah, we could see problems, yes.
Okay, cool. Anything else, guys? Any questions that you guys are experiencing coming from students? What are some frequently asked things that you guys are experiencing? I will share that Tammy guys from UH System just released the characteristics of the students taking the Next Steps classes, and that 68% of the students taking Next Steps classes have completed the FAFSA. So that's a great sign.
No, it's not. Sorry. What happened to the other 32%?
Exactly.
Why haven't they completed their FAFSAs?
This is probably a good time to tell you, hey, Frank, guess who's doing a FAFSA webinar for the Next Steps classes that will be coming up shortly?
Who would that be? Can I watch?
This guy with you.
I'm all in, you know that. Anything I can do to help.
So yeah, we will be doing that.
Gang, I can say this because you're all counselors and we're all friends and nobody will repeat whatever I say, but one of the big deals that we're not telling students, but one of the big reasons we're pushing for FAFSA, other than regular financial aid and everything else, is when this CARES money came out, for many schools, it was if you got a FAFSA on file, you get the money. Look, I got no idea what's coming in September. I don't have any idea, and I wouldn't pretend to second guess Congress. But I don't think we're done yet. I think stuff is going to happen. And I don't know if these court cases are going to hold up. I don't know if the department's requirement that they be Title IV eligible is going to hold up. I don't know if DACA students are going to be excluded. I just don't know these things. But what I do know is that if the student has got the FAFSA on file, at least they got that covered. And again, I'm not going out telling students, you may get money if you got the FAFSA. We don't know that. I just have no idea. But I do know that students this year that didn't have a FAFSA file missed out on an opportunity to get some money. So file your FAFSA. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but.
That should be the message. Okay. Any other questions coming in? I did want to take this opportunity, since I have you guys in front of me, to talk about something that Frank and I piloted with Ashley and Eric at Castle High School, targeting your junior students. I know you guys are in the thick of your summer counseling duties, but when you turn your attention back to the class of 2021, Frank and I had just piloted a presentation where we could come and do a webinar for you guys for the class of 2021. Think about it. It might be a resource in the future, especially when we don't know how things are going to be executed in the fall semester with parent nights and financial aid nights. A posted webinar might be a way to address your class of 2021.
And I'd like to add on to that. I mean, again, I know a lot of you out there, and I'm concerned with people like Denise. And Denise, I don't mean to pick on you, but Denise's financial aid night, when we would go out to Mililani, there's 300 people in that room. And I don't care what you want to do unless we're going to spread out on the football field. Social distancing with 300 people, I just don't know. I'm working with Damien High School, is one of the schools that I've already scheduled for a financial aid night, and they only have 50 people. And what they're going to do is they're going to move it to the gym, and they are going to do the social distancing, and we're going to do it live in person. But I want you all to know that we're there for you. We're going to do it. Just let us know what you think works best for you. I mean, Denise, I go to bed at night having nightmares about having to go to Mililani 6 times in a row to break it into small groups and going, oh, God, yeah, that's a long drive. No, but I mean, if that's what it takes, we'll do it. The webinar thing that we did for Castle, as Gus mentioned, that went over pretty well. I miss the students. I miss seeing their faces. You know, the jokes don't work very well on Zoom at all. I can't tell whether they don't go over very well. You can't see the faces to know if they're understanding you or if you're just, you know, you're way out of bounds and you need to go back. It's hard, but it works. Gus and I have been talking about recording it. So we're looking at possibly taking our hour and 45-minute, 2-hour FAFSA night kind of thing, which really breaks down into 2 45-minute sections, one being general information on financial aid and the other being the FAFSA itself, line by line. So we're talking about recording those 2 sessions in one of our Zoom presentations and passing it out to anybody that wants to use it. Good and bad, it makes it easy, yes. I don't necessarily like it because I miss the questions. And again, I think these presentations, the most important thing we do is able to answer the parents and the students' questions. So as much as I dislike Zoom, and I'm learning to dislike it more and more every day, I would rather be there on Zoom with your students to answer their questions than just handing them a video. But it really is what's going to work best for you. We got a great partnership going with Gus and I now because he knows things that old people like me don't know and can make it happen. So it's working really well, and we'll do what we need to.
Thanks. And Eric's on the call, FYI. So thanks, Eric, for your great feedback. You mentioned it went really well. April, did you want to ask your question? I know you mentioned you're just trying to figure out what the webinar was covering. I'm assuming you're talking about the Castle webinar, correct?
Yeah, I was just curious, like what exactly did you guys, and how far did you go, and how long?
April, it's my presentation that we expanded because we had time. So the presentation itself went for about an hour with about another 30 minutes of questions.
Wow.
So
Okay.
yeah, but basically we updated the information and addressed some of the, you know, the processes of a financial aid office, stressing the fact that you need to submit the FAFSA by October 1st, the FAFSA opens and you want to submit it as quick as possible. And then identifying the scholarship process and total cost of attendance, that kind of stuff.
Okay, thanks.
Awesome. So we're about reaching the end of our meeting. So thank you, everyone. Just wanted to reiterate Ramey's thoughts that she would think a recording would be great for 11th grade students. I think that would just be helpful for all schools, really, to just allow any access for students to review it at any point. And then, of course, Mililani. Oh my gosh. Thanks, Frank, for all you do. They love you.
Well, we love them too.
I encourage you all. I know, Denise, you mentioned about talking about setting up your meetings. I would say do it as soon as possible. Get things on calendar, because we're so lucky to have Gus and Frank as our FAFSA gurus, but they also are going to be serving a lot for the community colleges as well, knowing that, you know, these Next Steps program has showed really good impact on these students. So please go ahead, reach out to Gus and Frank to start scheduling for your fall events already. I mean, you have the time now for the summer, and I think it'll be easier now and spread it out for Gus and Frank before everyone hits them at one time, and scheduling isn't as great. So please recommend it. All right, Frank and Gus, as summary, what are like maybe the 3 huge takeaways for all these counselors that are jump off the call right now? 3 key takeaways, really shortly. What would you say?
Short, sweet, and simple. It depends, maybe. It's institutional, and I don't know. There you go.
All right, I love it. And you guys, please make sure you share out the FAFSA at hawaii.edu email to all your students, to all your parents. This is also a continuing email that we'll be using even when you return back to your roles in the fall. So please, just so you know, it's Frank and Gus actually behind checking these emails. So again, now you know them. They are the best to connect with your students. So yeah, definitely get that in your memory.
And you can use it too.
Yes,
Now that you know it's Gus and I back there, there's really nobody else. So, I mean, if you need to get hold of us and for some reason you don't have our direct emails, shoot us something on FAFSA at hawaii.edu. If we need to, we'll move you off onto one of our personal emails, but we're there and you can ask us questions too.
And again, one last reminder, we know that we're all going virtual. Please refrain from providing any social security numbers through texting, through any type of email formats. That's where we encourage you to get on a phone call or on a Zoom call to work with students one-on-one with FAFSA. I mean, you definitely can communicate on FAFSA pieces, but when it really comes to personal PII information, please definitely talk with the person on a phone call or a Zoom. But thanks so much, Frank and Gus. I really appreciate it. Thank you, counselors, for being on the call. I think you can kind of see how beneficial this format actually works. And just brainstorm how you would think this would best fit your students and your families, thinking coming up into the fall. So use the email. If you have questions, you can definitely email personally me or to Gus. And just so you also know, Frank is actually a West Oahu employee. But he is our strong partner for FAFSA P-20. So just so you guys know, if you guys have West Oahu kids, Frank is your go guy. All right, everyone, happy Friday. Take care.